In the year 1200 before Christ, humanity achieved something impossible: a seamless, hyper-connected global economy spanning 8 titanic Mediterranean superpowers. The gold-rich Mycenaean warlords ruled Greece. The Hittites held Anatolia. Egypt flourished under the 19th dynasty of god-kings. Cyprus supplied endless copper. Ugarit dominated coastal shipping, while Babylon, Assyria, and Mitanni anchored the imperial trade networks of the East. These empires did not live in isolation. Egyptian doctors treated Babylonian princes, and Minoan frescoes adorned royal palaces in the Levant. Scribes across 8 distant capitals exchanged diplomatic clay tablets in Akkadian cuneiform, greeting rival monarchs with the phrase, "My beloved brother." By every known metric of metallurgy, architecture, and logistics, this was the absolute apex of ancient human achievement. And then, in less than 50 years, every single one of these superpowers was wiped off the face of the earth. Over 47 fortified stone megacities were burned to ash and never rebuilt. Writing vanished. Humanity was plunged into a 4-century dark age. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, in the investigative archives of Effects Unlocked. To understand why 8 empires died simultaneously, you must first examine the single technology that held their world together: bronze. Bronze was the semiconductor of the ancient world. It forged the plowshares that fed millions and the armor that enforced borders. Yet bronze has a fatal chemical catch. It is an alloy: 90% copper blended with precisely 10% raw tin. Copper was plentiful. The island of Cyprus produced so much of it that the metal was named after the island itself. Tin, however, was an absolute logistical nightmare. There were virtually 0 usable tin deposits anywhere in the entire Mediterranean basin. The primary tin mines that powered this international military-industrial complex sat over 3,000 miles away in the rugged mountains of Badakhshan in Afghanistan. Consider the sheer fragility. A piece of tin had to cross thousands of miles of desert caravan tracks across hostile nomadic territory. It changed hands through dozens of middlemen, boarded Phoenician merchant galleys at Ugarit, and braved pirate-infested waters to reach royal foundries. This was humanity's first just-in-time supply chain, and just like modern logistics, it operated with 0 margin for friction. Royal foundries held no multi-year stockpiles. If a single mountain pass was blocked in Asia, bronze weapon manufacturing stopped within 90 days. Excavations of the Uluburun shipwreck off Turkey revealed 10 tons of copper paired with exactly 1 ton of tin, the precise recipe. This extreme specialization created unimaginable wealth for the ruling elites, but it created an invisible, catastrophic single point of failure. Each kingdom became completely dependent on the stability of its neighbors. If one palace collapsed, the entire international trade circuit short-circuited. In the palace ledgers of Pylos and Knossos, scribes meticulously recorded every bronze spearhead, every ingot, and every chariot wheel. Centrally planned palace economies hoarded raw materials, leaving surrounding rural populations entirely dependent on royal distribution networks for basic tools. Farmers could not forge their own plows. Soldiers could not repair their own swords without the palace delivering imported Eastern tin. The system was hyper-efficient, hyper-profitable, and wound so tightly that any external shock would cascade through every kingdom at once. For 2 centuries, favorable weather and strong naval patrols kept the supply lines flowing, masking the profound fragility underneath. Kings traded luxury lapis lazuli, gold, and frankincense, convinced that their golden age of globalization would endure for eternity. Generations of citizens lived and died, knowing only an unbroken world of international commerce, treaties, and secure maritime borders. No single king or general understood the whole machine. They only knew that raw metal arrived by sea and wealth flowed out. By 1200 BC, the Mediterranean was running at maximum capacity with 0 redundant buffers left in the system. The Great Bronze Engine was roaring at full speed. And right at this vulnerable apex, nature reached in and pulled the plug. In 2013, paleoclimatologists drilled deep sediment cores beneath the Dead Sea and Sea of Galilee, unlocking the ancient world's geological crime scene. Trapped inside fossilized mud layers, the pollen of olive, oak, and pine trees suddenly collapsed. In their place, desert flora exploded. The Mediterranean winter rainfall engine had failed. Sea surface temperatures plunged 3 degrees, choking off moisture across the agricultural heartlands. This was not a dry season or a bad year. It was an unrelenting, catastrophic 150-year megadrought. From the Aegean to Mesopotamia, staple grain harvests withered in the soil. Soil turned to powder and blew away in storms. In the royal archives of the Hittite capital, Hattusa, archaeologists discovered desperate cuneiform dispatches from the Queen of Hatti to Egypt. "I have no grain in my lands," she wrote. "It is a matter of life and death. Send aid." Pharaoh Merneptah sent emergency shipments of wheat north to Anatolia, writing that he had caused grain to be taken in ships. Even Egypt's legendary agricultural surplus was draining rapidly as drought choked the headwaters of the Nile, dropping flood levels year after year. In the coastal port of Ugarit, the final preserved clay tablet reads, "Food in our house there is none. We starve." When food supplies drop by 40% in a centralized economy, civil order disintegrates. Starving peasant populations abandon dying fields in droves. Mass migrations pressed against fortified palace gates. Urban storehouses, once full of grain reserves, were emptied in weeks and never replenished. The overland tin routes from Afghanistan cut out first, as nomadic tribes plundered caravans simply to survive the winter famine. Deprived of tin, royal arsenals could no longer forge bronze weapons to replace damaged gear. Imperial armies were suddenly disarmed by logistics. With trade dead and crops burned, the Mediterranean became an unstable pressure cooker waiting for a single spark to detonate the basin. And then, emerging from the western horizon across the Aegean Sea, the spark arrived aboard hundreds of wooden longships. Egyptian temple walls at Medinet Habu carved their arrival in stone, calling them simply the foreign peoples of the sea. They were not a single unified nation. They were a confederation of displaced maritime cultures, the Sheridan, Peliset, Lucca, and Shekelesh. Driven from their homes in Sicily, Sardinia, and Greece by famine, they took to the sea not to raid, but to migrate. Raiding armies take gold and leave. The sea peoples loaded their wives, children, and ox carts onto ships because they had nowhere to return. They brought terrifying new tactical doctrine, long iron-slashing swords and light, agile javelins designed specifically to counter heavy bronze chariot formations. Chariots required smooth, open plains and costly bronze armor. The sea peoples fought as loose infantry swarms, flanking and slaughtering chariot crews. Coastal watchtowers from Greece to the Levant looked out onto horizons filled with black sails, horned helmets, and feathered war crowns. First to fall were the coastal islands. Cyprus, the copper capital of the world, was invaded, its smelting towns looted and burned. With Cyprus severed from the maritime grid, the supply of copper died alongside tin. The alloy collapsed entirely. In Greece, the Mycenaean warlords scrambled their remaining garrison forces, frantically building defensive stone walls across the Isthmus of Corinth. Linear B clay tablets from Pylos describe emergency orders. Commanders watching the coastal waters, detailing men stationed on cliffs without weapons. The defenses failed. Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos were breached in rapid succession. Their monumental Cyclopean palaces turned into ash heaps. When Mycenaean palaces burned, the bureaucratic scribes died inside. The art of reading and writing Linear B vanished from human memory entirely. Greece fell silent. For the next 4 centuries, not a single surviving written word was produced in the entire Aegean world. The migrating war fleets turned eastward toward the Levant, moving down the coastline like an unstoppable wall of bronze and fire. Through thick morning fog off the Syrian coast, the armada sighted the wealthy, unprotected quays of Ugarit. The final catastrophe began. Between 1190 and 1177 BC, 47 major urban metropolises were incinerated in the most violent half-century in human history. In Ugarit, King Amurapi received a frantic plea for military aid from the Hittite emperor, begging for ships to defend the coast. Amurapi's reply, discovered baked into ceramic glass inside a palace kiln, reveals total panic. The enemy ships have arrived and burned cities. All my troops and chariots are stationed in Hatti, and all my ships are in Lucca, he wrote. We are abandoned. Before the clay tablet could dry and be dispatched, the city gates were battered down. Ugarit was burned to bedrock. Archaeologists digging the site found arrowheads embedded in palace walls and unburied skeletons lying in streets beneath 2-meter ash layers. Ugarit, the wealthiest trading hub in antiquity, was wiped so thoroughly from the earth that it was never inhabited by humans again. In Anatolia, the Hittite capital of Hattusa met an even more horrific fate. The massive stone double ramparts were breached by invaders. The royal palace was engulfed in temperatures so intense that the stone foundations melted into vitrified glass. The Hittite Empire ceased to exist. Megiddo burned, Hazor burned. Lachish, Byblos, and Alalakh were pulverized. Across the Levant, entire civilizations disappeared in months. This was not ordinary warfare where kings took tribute. This was systemic network annihilation. When the hub nodes died, dependent towns starved. The complex administrative hierarchy that managed irrigation canals, dispute resolution, and grain distribution broke down into complete localized anarchy. By 1177 BC, 7 of the 8 great superpowers had been wiped off the map. Only one remained: Egypt. The entire Sea People's armada, flushed with victory, turned south and sailed directly toward the fertile mouths of the Nile Delta. Pharaoh Ramesses III knew his army could not defeat the invaders on the open Mediterranean in traditional naval combat. Instead, he designed a brilliant tactical trap, luring the heavy enemy galleys into the narrow, shallow river channels. He lined the riverbanks with thousands of elite Egyptian composite bow archers, concealed behind papyrus reeds, stringing heavy chains across the exits. When the enemy armada entered the bottleneck, Ramesses sprang the trap. A relentless blizzard of bronze-tipped arrows darkened the delta sky. Egyptian soldiers hurled grappling irons onto enemy decks, dragging heavy galleys sideways until they capsized in the thick river mud. Invaders weighed down by heavy bronze armor and horned helmets, drowned by thousands. The surviving warriors were slaughtered on the mud banks. Pharaoh Ramesses carved his victory on the stone walls of Medinet Habu. As for those who reached my frontier, their seed is not. Egypt had won the Battle of the Delta, but the celebration inside the royal palace at Thebes was hollow. The victory was entirely Pyrrhic. The international trading network that generated Egypt's immense wealth and funded its temples was gone forever. Cyprus was in ruins, Anatolia was empty, Greece was dark. There was no one left to buy Egyptian linen, papyrus, or gold. Cut off from Eastern tin and foreign tribute, the royal treasury spiraled into insolvency over the final years of Ramesses' reign. In the Turin Strike Papyrus, from year 29 of Ramesses III, we discover the first recorded labor strike in human history. Royal tomb builders at Deir el-Medina laid down their chisels and walked off the job because the state had no grain rations. "We are hungry," the tomb workers shouted. 18 days have passed this month, and our rations have not been given. Even Egypt, the last superpower standing, fractured into civil war, tomb robbery, and poverty, ending its glorious New Kingdom dynasty forever. In just 50 years, 3,000 years of accumulated civilizational momentum had been wiped clean from the earth. The Mediterranean entered a 4-century dark age. Monuments weathered into silence, and the names of great kings were forgotten by history. It is easy to dismiss this as ancient history, but when you examine modern civilization, we have rebuilt the exact same fatal machine. Look in the mirror at the modern world of 2026. We pride ourselves on unprecedented digital technology, global commerce, and interconnected intelligence. Yet our entire globalized empire is built on the exact same hyper-fragile architecture that doomed Mycenae, Hattusa, and Ugarit. In 1200 BC, their single technological bottleneck was tin from Afghanistan. In 2026, our bottleneck is advanced 3-nanometer semiconductors. Over 90% of the world's most advanced microchips are manufactured on a single 100-mile island in the Taiwan Strait. If that single island is blockaded or struck by catastrophe, global automotive, aerospace, telecommunications, and military production stops within weeks. In 1200 BC, the Mediterranean food supply relied on uninterrupted maritime trade routes between Egypt, Canaan, and the Aegean Islands. In 2026, 80% of global grain trade passes through just 3 narrow maritime choke points: Malacca, Suez, and Panama. Modern cities operate on 3-day grocery store inventory buffers, relying on continuous satellite GPS routing and diesel freight fleets. Complexity scientists call this a tightly coupled system. When everything is hyper-optimized for efficiency, redundancy is eliminated to maximize corporate margins. A single shock, a drought in grain belts, a maritime canal blockage, or regional war is absorbed, but multiple shocks hitting simultaneously trigger polycollapse. The citizens of Ugarit went to bed convinced their civilization was eternal. 50 years later, wild goats grazed across palace ruins. Civilizations do not fall because their people become weak. They fall because their structural complexity exceeds their capacity to adapt. Yet the collapse of 1177 BC reveals one final, profound historical truth. History does not end with collapse. Collapse is a violent, agonizing reset. But out of the ash, humanity was forced to reinvent itself. When royal palace monopolies burned, ordinary blacksmiths could no longer acquire imported tin. They were forced to look at local common rocks: iron. Iron ore was everywhere, in hillsides, riverbeds, and valleys. It did not require a 3,000-mile international supply chain to extract. The Iron Age decentralized metallurgy. Any village blacksmith could forge a plow or spear without begging permission from a royal king. And without royal scribes guarding complex hieroglyphs and cuneiform, Phoenician traders invented a simple alphabet of just 22 phonetic symbols. The phonetic alphabet broke the monopoly on literacy, laying the foundation for Greek philosophy, Roman law, and the modern written world. The late Bronze Age collapse wiped out the tyrants and mega-monopolies of antiquity to make room for the rise of classical civilization. It cleared the graveyard of rigid, centralized empires so that a more resilient, decentralized world could be born. As we build the complex systems of the 21st century, the ruins of 1177 BC stand as our warning. Efficiency creates temporary wealth. Redundancy, resilience, and local independence create long-term civilizational survival. If we fail to learn the lessons of the 8 vanished empires, we will inevitably repeat their trajectory. Today's case file is officially audited and resolved in the archives of Effects Unlocked. The evidence is now in your hands. If you found this forensic breakdown valuable, hit the subscribe button and bell icon to decode more hidden systems with us. We investigate the structural glitches, economic anomalies, and geopolitical inflection points that shape the past and dictate our future. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think modern civilization could survive a prolonged supply chain polycollapse? Share this case file with history and economics buffs who want to understand the real mechanics of civilizational collapse. Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and never take the stability of the grid for granted. This is Effects Unlocked, and we will see you in the next investigation.